On the afternoon of September 4th, 2017, a young man named Zhu rushed through a bus station in southern Taiwan. Zhu's bus home to the capital city, Taipei, would be leaving any minute now, and because Zhu was running late, he knew the bus would be packed and he would get a terrible seat. And so Zhu just kept on running as fast as he could, and he finally saw his bus parked up against the curb on the outside of this bus station, and he ran up to it, totally winded, but glad that he hadn't missed his bus. And so the driver noticed Zhu standing there, and so he opened up the bus doors, and Zhu went on board, handed the driver his ticket, and the driver said, okay, take your seat. And Zhu turned and he began walking down the aisle. And at first, he almost didn't register the weirdness of the inside of this bus. I mean, he took this route all the time and he was totally expecting this bus to be packed. But as he was walking down the aisle, he realized he was the only one on the bus. There was literally nobody else. It was just Zhu and the driver. And so for a second, Zhu thought maybe he had made a mistake and this was not his bus, but he checked his watch and, again, he had taken this bus many times and he knew this was it. And so he was about to turn and maybe ask the bus driver, but the bus driver shut the doors, turned on the engine, and began to pull away. And so Zhu just thought, well, I guess it's just my lucky day. I have the bus to myself. This is crazy. And so Zhu found a seat towards the front of the bus, and after sitting down and kind of getting situated, he just sat there and stared out the window as the driver, merged into traffic and eventually found their way onto the highway. And as they were just coasting along, Zhu really felt content. I mean, it really felt like he had this private ride all to himself. And this was not a short bus ride. It was like a 6-hour bus ride. And so the idea of just having peace and calm the whole time, that was so luxurious and unexpected. And so Zhu was just having a wonderful time, just kind of taking it all in, when all of a sudden he hears a woman coughing behind him. And remember, he's scanned the bus. It's empty. And so he whipped his head around, totally startled, like maybe there was somebody on the bus, but he looked behind him, and there was no one. And so very quickly, Zhu began to rationalize what he had just heard. He's looking around thinking, okay, one of the windows is slightly open. Maybe the wind was coming in weird and causing a sound, or maybe it wasn't behind me. Maybe that cough came from the driver, and somehow I thought it was back here. Zhu's telling himself that wasn't really a woman coughing because there's nobody here. And so before long, Zhu convinced himself that, that was just an anomaly. It was nothing to worry about. And he was back there just relaxing and enjoying this peaceful ride. And pretty soon after that, he began to drift off to sleep. A few hours later, Zhu woke up, and he was very groggy, and he looked out the window and saw it was dark, and he checked his watch and saw they were maybe about halfway to their destination, and then he looked at his phone and saw he had a text message from the friend he had just been visiting, the friend he had been with before he left and got on this bus. And the friend was basically asking Zhu how the ride home was going, and Zhu, he wrote back and said, you won't believe this, I'm on a bus that's completely empty, like I have the bus to myself. And this friend, who was familiar with how packed this particular ride to Taipei was like, no way, that bus is never not filled with people. You gotta send me proof. And so Zhu opened the camera on his phone, he turned around, and he snapped a photo of the back of the bus. But when he looked at the photo he had taken, it was very grainy, and there wasn't any light in the bus, and there wasn't a flash on his phone. And so instead, Zhu, who happened to be a semi-professional photographer, he pulled out his really nice, high-quality digital camera out of his bag, and with that camera, he turned around and took a photo. But when Zhu looked at the photo he had just taken, he thought there was something wrong with it. And so he zoomed in on the photo and he couldn't believe what he was looking at. And so he checked all the settings of his camera and checked the lens to make sure everything was working properly, and it was. And so starting to get kind of scared, Zhu put the camera down and walked to the back of the bus and walked up and down a couple of times looking for some explanation of what was in that photo. But there was no explanation, and so now feeling really scared, Zhu went back to his seat, grabbed his phone to text his friend to be like, look what I found. But his phone was dead. Even though his phone had full battery like a minute ago, now his phone doesn't work and he can't turn it back on. And so Zhu's thinking, what do I do? Do I tell the bus driver about this photo? But he was worried if he showed the driver, it would be so startling that the driver might crash the bus. And so Zhu really felt completely alone and terrified, and he just placed his camera next to him and then just closed his eyes and began silently praying that he would get off this bus. But as he was doing that, he began to hear whispering right behind him, like numerous people whispering right behind him. And he whipped his head around, but again, there's nobody there. And so now, the fear is only getting more and more heightened inside of Zhu. He goes back to praying. And now, in addition to the whispers behind him, he starts to hear the sound of seats basically creaking as if somebody's sitting in them, kind of rocking back and forth. And now Zhu, he's too scared to turn around. And so he just keeps on praying and praying. And the noise behind him, this cacophony of sounds, is getting louder and louder. And finally, Zhu looks up up at the driver, hoping the driver can hear the stuff, to confirm that Zhu's not losing his mind here. But the driver looked like he was just paying attention to the road, completely oblivious to what was happening inside of this bus. And so Zhu is horrified, has no idea what to do. These noises are not stopping, despite the fact nobody else is on this bus. And so Zhu finally plugged his ears just so he wouldn't hear it, and just tucked himself down in a ball and just continued to pray for the next 3 hours, all the way until the bus finally stopped. And when the bus stopped, Zhu unplugged his ears and opened his eyes, expecting to hear all these whispers and sounds, but the bus sounded totally quiet and normal. And the bus driver, was kind of going through the shutdown procedures of the bus. They were in the Taipei bus station. And so Zhu was feeling totally relieved here, and he couldn't wait to get off this bus. And so Zhu, he grabbed his camera and his things, packed them all up, and then as quick as he could, he began walking towards the front of the bus. But before Zhu got off the bus, the driver stopped him because he saw, Zhu looked horrible. He was sweating profusely. His skin was flushed. He looked like, something bad had just happened to him. And he asked Zhu, like, hey, are you okay? And Zhu was about to be like, oh, no, everything's fine, and just kind of get off the bus. But then he thought to himself, I have no explanation for what just happened, and that was horrifying. I don't know what that was. And I took this photo that I can't explain too, that seems definitely connected to all the noises I just heard. And now that the bus has stopped, there's no risk of showing the driver and risking scaring him so badly that we crash. And so Zhu thought, you know what? Even if it makes me look crazy, I'm going to show the driver this photo and see what he thinks. And so Zhu was like, actually, let me show you something. So he pulls out his camera and he shows the driver the photo. And as the driver is kind of looking at the photo, not really sure what to look for, Zhu, he reaches down and he zooms in on the top half of the photo, and it expands the ceiling of the back of the bus. And you can very clearly see there is a huge human arm and hand extending off the ceiling, like it's reaching down into the bus. And so as the bus driver is studying this arm and hand, Zhu is saying, I thought for a second that could have been me, reflected off the ceiling or something, but I was holding the camera in my hand, and so wouldn't the camera be in the reflection? If that's my arm, wouldn't the camera be visible? Because it's not. And then Zhu also was like, I thought for a second maybe it was your arm, but you're driving the bus. Your hands are on the steering wheel. And so if this arm is your hand, wouldn't the steering wheel be in the reflection? Like, I don't understand how there's an arm with nothing in the hand reaching down from the ceiling. And then Zhu also told the driver that in addition to this totally terrifying photo of this ghost arm coming off the ceiling, there were all these weird whispers and sounds and noises behind him for the whole ride. Like, it was horrifying. And so after Zhu has detailed to this bus driver that basically your bus is haunted and I have photo proof, Zhu is expecting the driver to have a pretty big reaction to this. I mean, geez, this is pretty big news here. But the driver just handed the camera back to Zhu and basically turned to Zhu and said, you know what? You can't show this photo to anybody. Like, no one can know about what happens on my bus, because if they find out, it'll ruin my business. And Zhu's thinking, wait a minute, does this mean the bus is haunted? Is that what the bus driver is confirming here? He doesn't seem shocked. He seems like this is completely routine. This is what happens on his bus. And Zhu was about to protest and be like, are you kidding me? Like, why aren't you telling people about what's happening on your bus? But then Zhu was like, you know what? I don't know this guy. I don't care about this bus. You know what? I'm done with this. And so he said to the driver, don't worry, I won't tell anyone about, your haunted bus. I won't show anyone this photo. Thank you. And then Zhu got off the bus. When Zhu finally got to his house, it was around midnight, and Zhu was exhausted. So he goes inside, he lays on his couch, and he plugs his phone in because his phone was dead. And as soon as his phone turned on, he saw all these messages from his friend who had asked him to send proof that the bus he was on was really empty. And so Zhu wanted to tell his friend about all the crazy stuff that had happened on the bus. He wanted to send him that photo of, the ghost arm. But also, Zhu had promised the bus driver not to share this information with anyone because it could destroy this guy's business. And so as he was sitting there kind of wondering how to respond, something caught Zhu's attention outside. And so he turned and looked out the window, and he saw all these people walking down the road carrying red lanterns. And suddenly, everything sort of clicked for Zhu. It was September 5th, which is important because it marked the beginning of a big event in Taiwan known as the Hungry Ghost Festival, and the people Zhu saw outside walking around with red lanterns were clearly participating in this event. This festival is celebrated every year in Taiwan, and it's all about honoring the dead and feeding them with offerings. For example, people will burn fake money they call ghost money, and once it gets burned, the spirits of the dead can use that money during the ghost month. People in Taiwan believe that during this ghost month, the gates of heaven and hell open up, and spirits come out and walk the earth alongside all the living, which could be a great thing. If you have a dead loved one or friend or somebody, you can reconnect with them during this event, but it it also can be a bad thing because sometimes angry spirits emerge from the gates of hell and they wreak havoc on the living. And so as soon as Zhu realized that, today was the start of this Hungry Ghost Festival, he realized why the day before when he was on that bus, he realized why it was empty. Because there's this superstition in Taiwan that September 4th, the day before this festival, is the day when all the spirits are traveling around the globe. And it's believed that that day is a very dangerous day for the living to be out and about, because you don't want to come in contact by accident with, one of the evil spirits. And so nobody travels on September 4th. But Zhu had just forgotten and just believed he had struck luck by having this empty bus. But then, as Zhu was kind of working this through in his mind, he was thinking, wait a minute, all that weird stuff on the bus, the whispers, the sounds, the ghost arm reaching out of the ceiling that he got on camera, was that some sign that he had just come in contact with an evil spirit? Was he now in danger? Was the spirit gonna follow him around and haunt him? He didn't know, but now he's thinking, oh my goodness, I did the thing I wasn't supposed to do, and now I could be paying the consequences for it. And so Zhu suddenly was like, you know what? I don't care that I made some promise to the bus driver about not disclosing this photo or what I experienced on the bus, because now this is like a me problem. I could have big issues here. And so he decided he would send this photo to his friend and tell his friend about what he experienced on the bus to see what his friend thought. And so after messaging his friend wrote back that he was horrified by that photo, seeing that arm reaching down out of the ceiling, that was horrifying. And his friend didn't know what to make of it and did agree that, given the fact that the Hungry Ghost Festival has just started and you were out there on the day before, this isn't good. You could have come in contact with an evil spirit here. But his friend also gave Zhu some advice of how to handle this. He told Zhu to take that photo and post it on Facebook. Now that sounds kind of goofy, but in Taiwan, there's this belief that if you have bad luck, the best way to deal with bad luck is to basically dilute that bad luck by sharing it with other people. It's kind of like those old email forwards that people used to pass around, like, hey, forward this email along to 5 other people or else you'll have bad luck. It was kind of like that. Just share it with the world and, pass on your bad luck to other people, basically. And so Zhu's friend told Zhu, look, I know this isn't really bad luck we're dealing with here, but maybe if you just share this with the world, dilute what happened to you, maybe that will reduce the power this ghost has over you. It's worth a shot. And so Zhu posted the photo to Facebook, and it pretty much immediately went viral. Millions of people saw it, and this is what Zhu wanted. He wanted, max dilution here, show it to everybody to reduce the chances that this, entity can hurt him. But after all these people saw it, lots of people were spooked, and they began messaging Zhu, not like, don't worry, it's diluted now, but instead they were like, hey man, you're in trouble. This thing's going to come after you. You need to seek real help here. You're in danger. And so this ended up freaking out Zhu more than the photo did in some way. It just made the whole situation feel far more real. And so Zhu ended up deleting the photo on Facebook, setting his Facebook to private, and basically staying off social media. And then he just kind of hoped and prayed that if he did nothing and just stayed home and kind of minded his own business, that he'd be okay. And after a few days, when nothing did happen, ultimately he just told himself, I'm okay. There's no ghosts here. I'm fine. But exactly 1 week after Zhu had got off the bus, so September 11th, 2017, Zhu is in his house, he's laying on the couch, not really thinking about what had happened on the bus, and as he's scrolling social media, he comes across this headline about this horrible accident out on the highway, not far from where he lived. And it was this one vehicle that got into this huge wreck, and 6 people were killed, and 11 others were injured. I mean, it's this horrible, horrible accident. And as Zhu is reading the article and scrolling down, he comes across a photo of the driver of this vehicle who's covered head to toe in blood. He looks totally haggard. He's standing out on this dark highway. And Zhu realizes the driver of the vehicle was the bus driver from when he had that horrible experience on the bus. It's the same guy. And so Zhu's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? He scrolls down and he realizes the vehicle that crashed was the exact same bus he had been riding in when all this stuff happened. It was the same bus driver, same bus on the exact same route that this accident happened. And so obviously this is a horrifying coincidence. Zhu very likely was thinking, I'm so lucky this didn't happen when I was on the bus. But when you take into context what Zhu experienced on that bus just a week earlier, the photo, the sounds, all of it, this story gets even weirder. Because the official story is the driver was negligent, and that's what caused the crash. That's it. And he actually went to jail for negligence. But there's video footage taken from inside of the bus right before it crashed, and in the final 30 seconds, something strange happens. The driver does not seem distracted at all, he's just driving along, but then something catches his attention, something off to his side. And you can tell right away he notices whatever this thing is, and he's turning, he's looking at this thing, he's not really paying attention to the road, and he starts reaching down. I mean, he's interacting with something in the bus, and you can't see it on camera. And as he gets more and more into dealing with whatever's happening over here, the bus crashes. Now, the driver never gave any public testimony about what was going on right before he crashed. All we have is the fact that it crashed and this video footage and Zhu's experience and that photo he took. And when you put it all together, it really makes you wonder if there was any truth to there really being some evil spirit on that bus that maybe did cause this crash. Or is it just a series of unexplainable coincidences? You be the judge.